Good evening, George Orwell.
When talking about the great writers of the 20th century, a handful of names are synonymous with the time period, be it for an English lecturer or a high school student. One of these is George Orwell. His works such as Animal Farm in 1984 are timeless classics, which leave readers today asking questions about society and where it's heading. Though today, what I'm going to be talking about is one of his short essays, which there are many of, titled Why I Write, explaining the 4 reasons which Orwell believed encourage a writer and how his writing style developed from his first poem at the age of 4 to his penultimate work in 1984, alongside the short history of the man and the general philosophy that all writers and creators should take from his work, with the conclusion hopefully answering the true question of why we write. George Orwell, or his birth name Eric Arthur Blair, was born on the 25th of June 1903 in India to a family of reasonable means. His grandfather was a wealthy enslaver who married an aristocracy. However, by the time his father had gained the wealth, it was very much deficient, though this did not stop his parents from wanting an upper-class education. By 1905, he was back in England to be educated where at 11 years old he attended St. Cyprian's. He described his experience as being surrounded by snobs. This would lead him onto a scholarship at the world-renowned School of Eton in 1917, where his disdain for authority was born. Rebelling against his parents' desires for him to go to university, Orwell instead returned to India, where in Burma he became a policeman in 1922 for a colonial force. His time there was more of a torture for him than his family. He would be hated by everyone, and once back in England in 1927 on leave, he decided not to return, and instead his path took him to East London. He had decided to live with the lowest of society, where he slept alongside homeless people and beggars, with himself dressing as if he had no money, and continuing this for 4 years until he moved to Paris. Here he would do a similar thing, living with hotel workers and prostitutes, as he refined his writing, staying weeks at a time with those without money, and returning for weeks to his parents, having an intermittent experience of poverty and wealth, which would lead him to write his first book, Down and Out in Paris and London. It would be published, selling few but gaining good reviews. This saw his publisher put out some of his other works, such as Berger Days, though little sales continued. Though his fortune changed when Victor Gollancz offered him £500 to write about poverty in England. Orwell accepted and began his infamous time in North England. Orwell travelled and lived in the north of England, where he saw the disparity between the conditions in the south to those in the north, which became the catalyst for his work, Road to Wigan Pier, where he cemented his belief in socialism and an ideology which he would never sway away from. He then moved to Spain, where he was involved in the Spanish Civil War, where he almost died from a sniper shot from a fascist soldier. Afterwards, returning to England, where he expressed his hatred of communism in his book Homage to Catalonia and his later works. Though just before Orwell published his great works, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1939, adding to the tragedy that he felt from the Spanish Civil War. This would be increased when he was denied the ability to fight the Nazis due to his condition, and so he had to write propaganda for the BBC from 1941 to 43. Though at this time, arguably one of his greatest works was being formed, Animal Farm, which was published in 1945 and sold 250,000 copies in the first year, cementing Orwell as a successful and acclaimed author, with his emergence of political commentary and fiction. However, this would come to a head in his last work, 1984, which would be published on the 8th of June 1949. Orwell would succumb to his illness on the 21st of January 1950, leaving the answers to what 1984 all meant unanswered, though he would leave behind a legacy of one of the greatest political commentators and writers who have ever put pen to paper. Orwell is known for his great works of dystopian fiction and political commentary. However, one of his most intriguing works is his short essay, Why I Write, which outlines the 4 motivations which Orwell saw for any writer picking up a pen or keyboard and putting their beliefs, feelings and life onto the page or screen. For me, these motivations resonate, but also contradict how many others feel about writing. And in that itself, it reveals the question of what it means to be a writer and who should write. This for me is the most intriguing point which Orwell makes, and is so contradictory to what many believe about writing, even one of my heroes, Charles Bukowski. Orwell argues that feeding of the ego through success and the goal of being remembered are the key motivations to why we write. He does not go for the typical argument of the true artist, who only writes because there is nothing they would rather do, that writing is purely an outlet that the writer does to express himself, and if no one read any of their work, it wouldn't matter. Rather, Orwell shows the truth that within most of us there is a desire to be known, to be seen as intelligent to our peers, to prove to those who doubted us that they were wrong. Contradicting the likes of Keskesay, who believe that one should only write because that's what they have to do, not for recognition or fame. Orwell does caveat this, as he does say that even though writers are ego-driven and desire recognition, they are not driven by money. For me, however, this shows Orwell has found the balance between the romanticised notion that we should just write because it's an inherent thing within us, and that we also shouldn't write for the ideas of fame and wealth. Instead, he finds wealth through our peers, giving us praise and leaving a legacy behind with our writing. The second one comes in how we write to share our perception of beauty which we see within the world, to share our favourite rhythm or prose which only we can put to paper. It's the way we share our experience of life, the feeling the artist betrays with a brushstroke on a canvas, or a singer in their change of pitch, which shares an experience which the writer sees too valuable to be missed. It is a motivation which inspires all art, and it is a motivation which has been attached to humanity since the beginning of man, with the passing of stories through generation to the finger paintings placed on the cave walls by primitive man. It's undeniable. This is the shortest and simplest motivation, the desire to see things as they are, to find out true facts, and to store them up for use of posterity. The fourth and final motivation is one which needs to be remembered and is often forgotten, that each writer has a political bias which, whether they mean to or not, simply by creating a piece of prose, they push their feelings and ideology into the world, to push it forward by accident or by ignorance. Orwell argues that no book is free from political bias. It is the argument that art should be apolitical is itself a political statement, and so politics cannot be separated from art, and in turn, writing. There is so much we can take from Orwell's motivations for writing, both as aspiring writers to observations of political work. Orwell has set out to show that no matter who the agent of any artistic piece be, a director of an avant-garde movie to a piece of creative fiction, the producer of the piece will always subconsciously or purposely have laid upon it their experience of the world, what they believe the world to be, and their seeking of truth. These are essential to remember when you next read an advertisement on the street, read a piece of fiction, or stare at a piece of paint on a canvas. What is the producer trying to express? What have they expressed, and why have they done so? What Orwell has given us are the paradigms to understand our own work and experience other people who work around us. It's the key to understanding political change and understanding ourselves through our own work and our own motivations.